Welcome back to Sustainability Reflections Chats. I'm your host, Wendie, and today we're going to learn how to use the impact-driven business model to take our root causes and align our funding and get us a little closer to where we want to be to sustain our efforts. This is part 2. If you missed part 1, go back and watch it because there are a lot of things that you might have missed in that chat. In the first conversation, we talked a lot about our implementation, our funding, and our outcomes, and how we can align those three things. Now, of course, we're going to continue that conversation today, but today we're going to use a different framework. This is called the impact-driven business framework, and this is how I help my clients to think a little bit more about their own operations and how they can also align with other partners, business and nonprofit partners, to make sure that the funding we have goes around between the different types of organizations who want to make an impact in the community. Let's take a look at the impact-driven business model. There's an impact mission, a profit mission, and marketing that helps fuel those two. For a social business, the marketing is a way to increase revenue and increase sales in order to complete the profit mission and to fuel the impact mission. To give back and do more good, not only through our dollars, but in other ways as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of those ways later on in this video. Now, if you're a nonprofit, you inherently focus on your impact mission, but you have to have a profit mission in order to do good. So our marketing is how we can use our impact mission in order to fuel our profit mission and to make sure that people know exactly what we're doing and how good we actually are. Let's start out by talking about the impact mission. As a nonprofit who's looking for sustainability or a social business partner who's trying to think about the sustainability of your investments, shared risk and protective factors is a great way for you to think about how to invest your money in the things that really matter. Those root causes that are going to make a difference. If we take these risk factors and we make them smaller, we're likely to have better outcomes. Of course, if we increase these protective factors and we add more funding or more resources there, we're likely to get better outcomes as well. If we continue to ignore the problem, we're likely to get the same outcomes that we have right now. So how do we use the shared risk and protective factors model in order to ensure our investments are put into the right place as a social business or a nonprofit? There are a couple of key questions that you can ask yourself or you can ask your partners if you're working in a partnership, where you think about exactly what is it that you're trying to do and how are you addressing the risk factors. If you're using our tool that goes along with this sustainability talk, there's a space where you can assess this and you can even alter the tool for different risk factors if this doesn't happen to match the framework that you use for your work. Now, there are a lot of places that we can put our energy, and we want to focus on those risk factors that really matter. Now, how do we know that? Well, of course, any outcomes data that we have about the community can help us to better understand which risk factors and which protective factors really move the needle on the work that we do. We can ask ourselves, who are the partners and where are the places where these risk factors and protective factors naturally occur within our community? And how can we make sure to invest more in those spaces and those organizations? We can also think about what funding streams might be accessible and how we can get a handle on those funding streams to bring them into our community for these specific pieces of our work. As organizational leaders, it's important that we have a really strong grasp on what funding we do have to do the work that we're doing. And of course, all of our outcomes must be evaluated. Therefore, our strategy for evaluation, our strategy for operations, and our budget must align. That means that they must be equally balanced in terms of the resources that they use and the resources that come into them. There are, of course, a couple of key factors that influence exactly what we do in any of these strategies. There's the stakeholders and the people that you serve who ultimately should have needs that you're trying to understand better and think about and serve as you do your work. There's the leadership of your organization. If you're not in a leadership position, these are people who often are the decision makers or people who might influence policy or decisions around you. And then there are board members or people who have the ultimate say in voting on how funding and how revenue and how strategies dictate what the organization does. There are a lot of outcomes that we might be getting to in terms of the programs and services or the people that we're serving or the causes that we're serving. And all of those outcomes have to be aligned to the type of money that we want in order to reach them. There are two different types of money that I'm going to continue to talk about in this video, so I might as well take a minute to define them now. Restricted funding are those types of funding where there are strings attached and it's not just funds we can use for whatever purpose we want. Now, unrestricted funding are the other and opposite types of funding where there are no strings attached and we're allowed to use the funding as we dictate as an organization. Both of these types of fundings have to come together to meet our operating costs for our entire budget for our organization and the entirety of the programs that we serve. That means that any direct costs to operate the programs, like staffing or resources, as well as indirect costs, are those things that we have to split across the organization, say legal fees or accounting fees. All of these have to be covered by the resources that come into our organization, and it can get quite complex. This graphic actually helps you think about how do you balance all of these things. And we're going to take it to one level more complex, just so you can think about how do we layer in the shared risk and protective factors that we're serving. The other thing I want you to think about is these revenue streams, because we're going to dig into exactly how we can diversify the unrestricted and the restricted funds next. As part of our sustainability model, we recommend an investment and divestment strategy. This means that you're going to take stock in what exactly is working before you do any type of decision making or strategy development around the funding that you're going to use moving forward. If you're planning for sustainability or thinking about the sustainability of your work moving forward, investing in those things that reached outcomes and divesting from those things that did not serve you or did not reach outcomes. That means that we have to have data or some understanding of what worked and what didn't. We can look at actual data from the programs and services that we provided. We also can look at community or client reflections, self-reflections from our staff or from other people who were in our programs, and others around us, such as our partners, who can help us think through what are some of the challenges that we face and how we can better overcome them in the future. The investment and divestment strategy has a lot of key questions that come up throughout the process. If you're working as part of a partnership, this is a great way for you to take time and stop to start the conversations around sustainability. If you're working solo, you can ask yourself these questions and come to an understanding of what are those things that you really want to spend time and resources on in the future. In the next couple of segments of this video, we'll talk about how do you then align this desire to spend time and energy in these spaces with the actuality of the money that it'll take to do that. First, we'll start out by asking yourself what worked and what didn't, and what is the best collective use of our resources. That means that we want to spend time in resources in the places that are the best use, and again, divest from those things that really weren't helpful to us to reach the outcomes that we desire. We also want to understand who is responsible for making these decisions around sustainability and how can we best ensure that the people who are supposed to be empowered to help us make decisions are part of the process. And then we want to understand what money or funding might be needed. And if there isn't funding available currently for this, how can we seek that aligned funding? And then if there are things that we need to close down because we're going to divest in those strategies, then we have to be strategic about how we're going to abandon the work that we're doing. That means that we might sunset staff or sunset some of the resources or locations we are working in currently. The best way to do that is to make sure that you have some leadway prior to the end of a project, at least 6 months in advance, to make sure that you're having these conversations and that people are operating with transparency and that the people who are making the decisions around sustainability or these leaders that we just talked about are empowered to have these conversations. When it comes to the funding conversation, a lot of the times we're thinking about what are the types of funding that we could look for. Now, there's a lot of types of funding besides grants, and we're going to talk about these first. We'll get to grants in a second, but I want you to think about the things that you can do besides grants, because grants ultimately are not sustainable. We know that going from grant cycle to grant cycle is not a way to sustain your work. And there's also so many other ways that you can think about your work and other ways that you can align it with more sustainable resources. If you are a nonprofit, then there are at least 8 ways that you can develop your funding streams to be more sustainable. And these are the ones that I recommend you look into if you haven't already decided exactly how these resources are going to support the work that you're doing currently. As you looked at the root causes of your work, there sometimes are resources for specific root causes or specific causes of our specific population and people that you might be working with. And I always want to encourage people to think about the ways that you can use both the cause and the funding together to find the right aligned resources for you. Now, corporate donations or corporate sponsors or businesses, social businesses are a great way for you to diversify the corporations or the businesses that you work with. You can also look to partners within your local chamber of commerce and have specific asks for corporations. We'll talk next about how to frame those asks and how you can be specific about the things that you need. Individual donors, most people think of this traditionally as donations, but there are also other ways to cultivate individual donors that include annual campaigns and annual resources through workplaces, but giving is done by an individual. Then there are campaigns for specific causes and specific needs. And as you think about sustainability of a resource or of a program, it might be that there are stopgap campaigns that need to take place in order to float you from one resource to another. Campaigns are a great way for you to ask your donors and current supporters to make sure that the programs that you are running have a sustainable leadway. You can start these campaigns well before the end of a grant, and you can make sure that donors understand that this is an ongoing need that you're going to have after a grant as well. Now, annual resources or annual giving campaigns, sometimes they're a percentage of things that happen, events that happen throughout the year that you're able to take annual resources from to dedicate them to your programs. It's important to understand if you're looking to sustain a specific funding stream or a specific set of work, then you want to know exactly what annual resources are available from the organizational level to ensure that your staff in particular or ongoing needs that you have for these programs are covered with resources that are always generally available in the organization. And some of the more nuanced or different types, or newer ideas, innovative ideas around funding, you can find over here in this column with the bullets. Crowdfunding is something that both nonprofits and social businesses can access and is a great way to involve the community in your projects and what you're doing. This is where you're going to ask the community to support your work and make sure that the community understands exactly what you're doing so that they can support you. Live streaming, like our old school Jerry Lee Lewis telethon, is one way to raise resources through the mechanism of the internet. If you haven't done a live stream before, I can understand how this might seem a little bit daunting to you, but it is a way and a resource for people to raise money from complete strangers who support the same causes that we do, but just happen to be somewhere online. Special events, as I mentioned, are a great way to share resources or revenue, especially if you're looking for corporate business or sponsors from small businesses to make sure that you have the ability to bring business in their doors, but also that you've asked for a percentage of sales on those proceeds. This is another great way to build partnerships and strong lasting relationships over time, or possibly something that you can tap into again and again every year. The last way that people always forget, but is the fuel for a social business, is to make sure that you're using your earned income to support your overall impact mission. It seems pretty interesting from a nonprofit perspective because a lot of people forget that earned income is actually allowable as a nonprofit. Of course, it's limited how much money you can earn, but you can think about things like ticket sales or other types of merchandise that you can sell where you can directly receive proceeds to your nonprofit in order to support your work. I told you it was going to get a little bit more complex. So this is where it gets a little bit more complex. If we're really thinking through our sustainability in a structured way, we start out with that theory of our evaluation and our outcomes have to help fuel our operating budget. That's where it tells us exactly how we're going to invest or divest. Once we've gone through those conversations with our partners and our leadership, and we understand what strategies are going to move forward, we can think about them as general areas that we're going to make an impact. They might be divided by people we serve, or the types of programs that we operate, or the ways that we do our outreach into the community. Let's just say, for sake of ease, program area 1, 2, and 3. Each of these areas is going to have their own operating costs and their own staffing, and each of these areas will have their own needs for funding. As we understand what funding is currently available or in the future that we're applying for, we can think about this in two ways. One, the restricted funding that we're looking for, and then two, the unrestricted funding that we need to augment that need. Now, the restricted funding, we can align it to these program areas by what we do and what our funder wants us to do. What they want us to do is where we use the SAVE framework. The SAVE framework is coming up in a couple slides, so we'll save that for next. But I want you to understand that you can find grants and you can find contracts for almost any type of activity. That means that as you're thinking about a coordinated funding strategy, you're first thinking about those root causes that we talked about with the shared risk and protective factors, and then coordinating that with the types of funding that you're looking for. After that, you're going back and asking, as an organization or as a program, what are the different ways that we're raising funds for those things which are not covered already by our grants and contracts? In this structured way, you can begin to understand, not only as a program or as a professional leader or an organization, where your funding is going, but how you can follow the gaps and the resources to make sure that you're finding the places to plug in the hole and the resources that you need for those holes. Now, the other thing I wanted you to understand, though, is that marketing plays a big piece of this, because marketing is a super important way for you to fill those gaps. As you understand where your resources are going and where your resources are needed in the future, you can use your marketing to tell people exactly what you don't have coverage for. It seems like a novel answer, but if you're just marketing for the sake of marketing and focusing on awareness or brand awareness, and you haven't aligned specific asks to your program areas or the gaps that you have, then of course, you're just going to get money from whoever's out there. And you may not be getting money from people who really care about the things that you're actually doing and the outcomes that you're actually getting. So, how do we draw revenue? This is where we start taking it home with a couple of frameworks that I want you to take away from this. This is going to be speed homework. So, make sure that you take notes. We're jumping right in with the dollars, people, time, and donations, or the DPTD framework. First part of the framework is dollars, and this is how social businesses give back. Dollars is where nonprofits can frame your asks for the types of resources that you're looking for and to help fill those gaps that we talked about. As a social business, it's important that you dedicate a part of your revenue and actual hard dollars, because this is where the tax deductions come from. The second part of this framework is people. Now, people is the manpower that we can give as social businesses to help nonprofits to complete their work. And as a nonprofit, these are the types of volunteers and resources that you can ask for to help make sure that your impact mission is served and that your profit mission is sustainable. Time are the professional services or resources that we can give as social entrepreneurs, specifically if you are a consultant or a service-based business, pro bono services or time in your programs that is free for different types of nonprofits is a great way to give back. As a nonprofit, donation is a way that we as businesses can help give our excess. Donations can be something as simple as giving space to a nonprofit to conduct a training. It also can be something to give back as our resources that are in excess of something that we produce as a business. A nonprofit can use the donations in a multitude of ways, and it's important as a nonprofit to take stock in all of the different types of donations that you're looking for to cover the different service areas that you have. Now, the SAVE framework is how we can think about grants and making sure that we're going to stay aligned with the vision and the mission for ourselves moving forward in a sustainable way. Now, we didn't talk about a lot about the marketing part of what we're doing, but the SAVE framework also helps us to align ourselves with the funders and market ourselves to funders before we even think about writing a grant, when we're writing a proposal or a prospectus for a grant as well. So, what is the SAVE framework? The SAVE framework helps us to align ourselves and our organizations with the funders that have their own vision for what they want to do. The first part of this is serve. Does the funding that we're looking for serve the same need or the same people that we do as an organization and our impact mission? We're going to take the time to assess the opportunity and all of the requirements in the opportunity and make sure that those are things that we're willing to do. Vision is how we can think about this work and if the work that the funder wants us to do in their vision aligns with our vision. Economics is how we can consider the economic principles of the work that we need to do in order to receive the money. Is it enough money? Is it not enough money? Is it money that has too many strings attached? The economics of the decision are really important. And energy, do we have the energy and the manpower to do the work that's required of us for this particular grant? So as we're going forward and thinking about grant opportunities, it's very, very vital that sustainability is based upon the same framework: serve, assess, vision, economics, and energy. If it's not right for us, then we shouldn't move forward. Bringing it all home, what can we do better? As nonprofits and as social businesses, we're thinking about sustainability. This video really focused heavily on the impact mission and our profit mission. How can we bring those both together? How can we start with the people that we serve, thinking about our business partners and our nonprofit partners and our community organizations and government, aligning funding and resources around those root causes? Remember, again, we can all be using the same framework in the same conversation, asking for resources and talking about the resources we need using the DPTD framework: dollars, people, time, and donation. This is a great way for us to raise capital, whether it's through crowdfunding or through other solutions that we might have that can engage the community in the ways that we do our work. Community engagement is one of the most sustainable strategies. Make sure that anything you do, any conversations that you have community voice at the table, and all of the decisions that you make are transparently shared back with the people that you serve. I'm Wendie Velos. I'm the host of the Social Impact Level Up podcast. You can find me at wendievelos.com, and I hope that you subscribe to this YouTube channel. Stay tuned for part 3, where we talk about the marketing piece of all of this.